Buying a home is perhaps the biggest single spending decision we ever make. And given how long-term the decision tends to be, even if we end up selling the home down the road, getting it right is one of the most important factors in setting ourselves up for long-term financial success. It should come as no surprise then that there are many rules of thumb out there to help us figure out just how much home we can comfortably afford. We've covered 3 of the most common ones a while back on this channel, and in a minute I will very quickly go over them again so that we have a baseline for comparison. But today, I want to focus on a lesser-known rule of thumb for buying a home. The 30-30-3 rule. It's a rule that's meant to work well in volatile and uncertain times. And given that that's what we've basically been going through for this past year and counting, it's a rule that I think we should all know about. So let's talk about the 30-30-3 rule and why it's so effective, particularly in uncertain times. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. And if you want to further support this channel, you can check out some of the links I've left in the description below, which includes a link to my Patreon page. This is the best way to show your support for this channel, and in addition to that, you can also get early access to new videos and exclusive content such as spreadsheets based off the ideas we discuss in these videos. The spreadsheets will allow you to play with your own numbers and see how big of a difference some of the ideas we discuss can make for your own personal financial situation. So real quick, the 3 most common rules of thumb when it comes to buying homes are the 28-36 rule, the 30% solution, and the 25% method. The 28-36 rule states that you should spend no more than 28% of your gross income on your mortgage payments. That includes the principal, interest, insurance, property taxes, and, if you have them, any PMI, HOA, and other fees associated with owning the home. The rule also states that no more than 36% of your gross income should be spent on your housing costs and all other debts. Or in other words, no more than 36% of your gross income should go towards paying your mortgage principal, or rent if you're a renter, interest, insurance, property taxes, PMI, HOA fees, and other debt payments like car loans, student loans, credit card payments, or other personal loans. This is the most standard rule of thumb and is often a starting point for lenders to try and determine how much loan you can qualify for. However, it doesn't say anything about how much money you need to put down on the home or have any provisions in there to make you think about other costs that may come up so that you can be prepared for them. The 30% solution states that no more than 30% of your gross income should be allocated towards housing costs, which basically includes the same thing as before. It also advises that you should have no more than 20% of your take-home pay going towards non-housing related debts. However, unlike the 28-36 rule, it doesn't have that second layer for you to adjust your housing costs if you're in a situation where you're up to your eyeballs in debt. So this could lead to some very tight budgets if you have a fair amount of debt relative to your income, and some very difficult months should you lose your source of income for one reason or another. The 25% method is the one popularized by Dave Ramsey, and it states that you should allocate no more than 25% of your take-home pay towards housing costs. This is undoubtedly the most conservative of all 3 rules of thumb, and generally works very well, especially in situations where you need to allocate a large portion of your income towards other financial goals such as giving, paying off debt, or investing in your future. The main downside of this rule of thumb is, of course, that it can take some time before you've either saved up enough money to put a large enough down payment on a home to follow the rule as written, or earn enough money so that you can do the same. The 30-33 rule shares some similarities to these 3 most commonly used rules of thumb, but it is different in a couple of ways, and those differences can make a big difference, especially during volatile or uncertain times like the ones we've been experiencing recently. According to Sam Dogan, creator of the Financial Samurai blog where I first stumbled onto this rule, there are 3 questions you need to answer before deciding whether a home is within your current budget. First, just like with the 30% solution, can you keep your net costs of home ownership at or under 30% of your gross income with the home you're looking at? Second, do you have at least 30% of the home's price saved in cash or some other equivalent in order to cover a 20% down payment and have a cash cushion for other expenses that may come up during the home buying process or shortly thereafter? And third, is the home's price less than or equal to 3 times your annual household gross income? Now, Sam does say there are some caveats to this strategy. First, he does say that he's okay with people stretching that third part of the rule from 3 times gross income to as high as 5 times gross income, especially if you're looking at buying a home in a more expensive market like San Francisco, though he isn't very comfortable with people extending themselves much further than that in most situations. He also mentions that while it would be ideal for someone to check all 3 boxes before buying a home, it's not always the most realistic. And even checking 1 or 2 of the boxes can make a world of difference. Let's take a look at how all this works with a quick example. Let's take 3 couples who are looking to buy a home. John and Jane, Bill and Mary, and Ted and Wendy. For the sake of trying to isolate the impact of following or failing to follow these rules as much as humanly possible, let's assume that all three couples have identical financial situations, including their incomes and future raises, their non-housing related expenses, their investment returns and home price appreciation, and the interest rates and other terms on any debt that they may find themselves in. To start with, we'll say that each couple earns $100,000 a year with an annual raise of 3%. They spend $48,000 a year on non-housing related expenses, which also increases by 3% per year due to inflation. They earn 8% per year on average before inflation on their non-housing related investments, and the value of their home grows at 3.5% annually, again, not adjusted for inflation. And if they should find themselves in debt, beyond the mortgage anyway, then they will pay 5% in interest on whatever amount they owe. Currently, we'll assume that they're debt-free. And finally, in addition to assuming that they have the cash to cover closing costs, we'll assume that they have $90,000 set aside for a down payment and, hopefully, a cash cushion. With that being said, let's get into the examples. Ted and Wendy are a bit rebellious and do not even attempt to follow the 30-33 rule, or any other common rules of thumb for that matter. They find a $750,000 home that they absolutely fall in love with. They get house fever, and as we said, they do have $90,000 set aside for a down payment, which is about 12% of the purchase price of the home, but that likely means that Ted and Wendy will have to get private mortgage insurance, or PMI, because they aren't going to be able to put 20% down on the home. Private mortgage insurance, for those who don't know, is basically a way for the bank to protect its investment when giving you the loan for the mortgage. It'll do nothing for Ted and Wendy when it comes to rebuilding their savings, paying off their mortgage, or building their net worth. It's just an added expense that they'll have to take on because they didn't have the ability to put 20% down on the home. But it will go away eventually once they have enough equity built up in their home. For the purposes of this simulation, I'm assuming that they need at least 22% equity built up in their home, or a loan-to-value ratio of 78%. Some loans have different requirements, but that's what I'm going to be assuming for this video. Generally speaking, the PMI costs somewhere in the neighborhood of 0.5% to 2.25% of the loan amount per year, depending on factors like your credit rating, debt-to-income ratio, and how much money you put down on the home. We'll give Ted and Wendy the benefit of the doubt and say that their PMI comes in at the low end of 0.5% of their $660,000 mortgage, or about $3,300 a year, or $275 a month. As for the mortgage itself, it is a standard 30-year mortgage, and they get a pretty solid 3% interest rate on it. This puts their monthly mortgage payment at around $2,783 a month. If we assume that property taxes and ongoing maintenance each cost 1% of the value of the home per year on average, insurance costs 0.5% of the value of the home per year on average, utilities run around $300 a month, and they spend roughly $250 a month on various home improvement and renovation projects, then Ted and Wendy's total monthly cost of owning their $750,000 home would be around $5,170. That's around 62% of their monthly income, which is way above the 30% that's recommended according to the 30-33 rule. Additionally, the home's price is around 7.5 times Ted and Wendy's annual gross income. And not only did they not hit the 20% recommended down payment threshold, but they're left with no cash cushion should some unexpected expenses pop up in the first few months of owning the home, or just before they manage to build back up their savings. So they're just breaking all of the rules in this scenario. But how does it work out for them? Well, as you'd expect, not very well. Over the course of the next 30 years, Ted and Wendy will be in non-mortgage related debt a lot. In total, they will spend 24 years and 4 months in non-home related debt. And it wasn't just little debt either. We're talking upwards of $76,000 of debt, over and above the mortgage by the 12th year of the simulation. If they managed to stick it out to the end, then by the time their mortgage was paid off, they would have about $137,000 in investments and a home worth about $2,034,000, for a total net worth of $2,171,000. If we adjusted that figure for inflation, it would be a little under $900,000 today, assuming an average inflation rate of 3%. Now, you may say to yourself, well, that's not so bad. Sure, they did end up in debt for quite a long time, but they did have a good enough income to handle it, and they do wind up becoming multimillionaires. And yes, technically you're right, but think about all the risk that they took on to get there, and how precarious their entire journey was. Again, the 30-33 rule seems, to me at least, to be specifically designed to be a solid rule of thumb for volatile and uncertain times, such as the ones we've been facing over the past year or so. How would Ted and Wendy's situation look different if they lost their jobs at some point in the simulation? What if there were actually some surprise expenses after they bought their house? Well, let's see. Assuming everything else stayed the same, but Ted and Wendy lost their incomes for 6 months at the start of the third year of the simulation, what would happen? In this new scenario, they will be in non-mortgage related debt for the entirety of the 30 years we're looking at. By the time their home is fully paid off, they'd still owe over $86,000 in non-home related debt. Obviously, any surprise expenses would only serve to put them further behind the 8 ball. Now, yes, the value of their home still does appreciate, which means they still do have a paper net worth of just under $1.95 million, or about $800,000 today after adjusting for inflation, but that paper net worth can't buy them anything. Unless they're able and willing to sell their home, they're genuinely probably worse off than they were when the simulation began. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to put all my eggs in one basket, whether it be a stock or a house. That's just too much concentrated risk for my liking. Beyond that, Ted and Wendy's multi-million-dollar net worth, impressive as it is, pales in comparison to what it would have been had they followed even one or two of the 3 parts of the 30-30-3 rule. Take Bill and Mary, for example. They do make some compromises to the rule, but they do at least attempt to follow it to the best of their ability. Let's assume that Bill and Mary bought a $450,000 home and used their $90,000 worth of savings to put 20% down on it. But literally everything else, from the calculations of property taxes and insurance rates to utility bills and improvements and renovations, stayed the same as it was in Ted and Wendy's original scenario. Here's what would have happened. Bill and Mary would never have gone into debt outside of their mortgage. Their total monthly cost of home ownership would be just a hair over $3,000 a month, or roughly 36% of their income. So they're still technically breaking that part of the rule, but it's at least much closer than Ted and Wendy. Their ending liquid net worth would have been nearly $3.35 million. Add in the value of their home, and their total net worth would jump up to over $4,565,000. About $1.88 million after inflation. They wouldn't have achieved financial independence quite yet, but unlike Ted and Wendy, they are at least well on their way to doing so. Even if we add in a job loss that Ted and Wendy experienced in the second version of their scenario, the results are still incredibly different. In this version of events, Bill and Mary do briefly go into debt for 7 months due to the layoff, though the outstanding balance never rises above $8,000. And they still manage to finish with a net worth north of $4 million, most of which is liquid. John and Jane take it a step further than Bill and Mary did, buying a $300,000 home, putting 20% down on it, or $60,000, and keeping the remaining $30,000 set aside as a cash cushion should something come up. Their total monthly cost of homeownership in this scenario was about $2,187, or about 26% of their income, so they've successfully followed all 3 parts of the rule. The result? No time spent in debt, even if they had lost their income for 6 months, a liquid net worth of $5.1 million, and an overall net worth of over $5.9 million. And perhaps best of all, according to the 4% rule, they became financially independent at the 26-year, 9-month mark of the simulation. They were the only ones to do so at all. If they had been laid off for those 6 months and lost their income in year 3, it would have pushed their financial independence date back to around the 28-year, 5-month mark, but they still would have achieved it. So you can see how big of a difference this rule can make to our financial present and future, even if we're just looking at things at the surface level. Since we were just trying to isolate the impact of following the rules in the hypotheticals, we didn't focus on any of the other impacts that it could have had in reality. Beyond the obvious benefits that come from having a larger cash cushion and simultaneously lower burn rate, like lowering day-to-day stress and potentially making investing more palatable, there are several other potential benefits. First is that by putting more money down, like John and Jane did, you can often secure lower interest rates on your loan. Granted, we're in a historically low interest rate environment, but every little bit counts. Second, having a lower burn rate can allow you to invest more money than you otherwise would have into tax-advantaged accounts. This can lower your tax bill and thus free up even more capital. Third, lower cost homes tend to be smaller and thus easier to maintain, heat, and cool, so you get savings there. Even if they aren't any smaller, because they are less expensive, they generally are cheaper to insure and don't incur quite as much property taxes. And all those costs add up over time. Fourth, those with lower amounts of equity built up in their home may be more tempted to walk away from it if something unfortunate happens to them, or if the value of the home and neighborhood or broader economy tank. Not only does potentially ending up in a short sale situation hurt the value of the properties around you, but it can also lead to missing out on a housing cost run-up such as the one that followed the Great Recession. And that's just to name a few, but unfortunately this video is getting long and there's still so much more I want to cover on the topic, such as whether or not making extra payments on the home is a good long-term play, whether putting the minimum amount down and investing the rest in something that we think will earn us a better return actually leads to us having more money in the end, the impacts of intermittent and ongoing lifestyle changes on the financial journeys we're seeing today, and how to utilize various strategies to get ourselves under the thresholds suggested by the rule, particularly in high cost of living areas. But I don't want this to turn into a 40-minute video, so I'm going to end it off here today and tackle those topics down the road. For now, I'll give you the floor. What do you think of the 30-33 rule? How does it stack up to the 28-36 rule, the 30% solution, and the 25% method? Or any other rules of thumb that you're aware of? Are there any improvements, additions, or alterations that you would make to the rule? Let me know in the comments section below. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.